mean, this is pretty exciting because Eliza is pretty exciting. Thank you for joining me. I am Melissa Sharpe, and I currently work in course and program design and development in higher education, but I have worked as a middle school English teacher, high school English teacher, first year composition instructor, writing center consultant, curriculum writer, and subject matter expert. I love lesson planning, meeting objectives, creating learning objectives, thinking about how the things we teach and the way we teach them, how those two shape not only students, but the world that they will inhabit. So I'm here today to present to you the value of teaching Hamilton, not only in your history classes, but in your English classes as well. I could make a 7,000 part video series on all the ways to teach Hamilton. I would love to dig into every single song and lyric that shapes Eliza, but for now it needs to be this singular video about introducing the concept of female character development, ways to do that with our students using Hamilton and specifically Eliza, and of course why all of that matters. Our lives as educators are going to be fine because Eliza is in it. Eliza is a gift. First, there is no reason to sell anyone on the quality and value of Hamilton as a piece of art. And now that it is widely available on Disney+, in addition to the cast recording and several wonderful animated YouTube videos, our access as educators is no longer a limitation. I find that pop culture texts, written, film, stage, whatever, are as valuable as any text we can pull into our classes. Pop culture is such a clear creation of the time that it is born out of, and pulling from current pop culture is always an attention grabber, and it's a great way to introduce those more scholarly topics and skills that we want our students to engage in. We can use current pop culture to introduce themes, literary devices, the art of analyzing in general, hook students with pop culture, give them a low-stakes place to practice analysis and conclusion drawing, and then lead them into whatever your canonical text may be, and grade them on that final paper. When we teach character development to young students, it always starts off it's a conversation about a collection of traits. A character is ABC. She is sweet, lonely, old. And by this standard of measurement, everybody's fully developed. However, by the time we're working with high school and college students, and please note I'm not a big fan of drawing a line between high school and higher ed, so throughout this video I'm targeting 11th grade through those 200 level students. By the time we're working with this group, we look at motivation and arc and how characters interact with those around them. And we do all of this good work to discuss themes and uncover truths. We analyze the literature. But sometimes we reserve certain critical analyses and lenses for our English majors in those upper level undergrad lit courses. Or we might use them, but we don't call them out as to what they are. I think this does a disservice to older high school and college students who may not be seeking an English degree because regardless, life imitates art, which in turn leads to art imitating life, or whichever one you want to believe comes first, and all students need to see this and think about the way that it shapes their world and how they will shape their world. So by helping them critique the development of female characters in their Gen Ed English courses, we are doing the work that I know we value. And while the line from analyzing how women are created in literature may not be a clear, direct shot to improved society, it is a part of it. And we want our students to flex their critical thinking skills and try out those new lenses. And we need easy entries to do that. And here's how Eliza can help. One thing that I want to note is everything I'm presenting assumes you are familiar with Hamilton, the plot, and the characters. There's no context whatsoever because I don't have the time. So, when looking at the development of female characters, the first thing that we want to consider is complexity. That complex characters are fully developed characters, and then that fully developed character is a powerful tool. Women, particularly women of color, are often one-dimensional. I think the phrase one note is a great way to introduce this to students. And the issue with that is that we can take that development out of art and into life, and the result is that it becomes easy to dismiss people as being a sassy best friend and nothing else, or a means to some sort of end. Now, that conversation is probably not the one you are going to open with when teaching character development, but that is the conversation that you will eventually have after looking closer at character development. But back to opening that conversation, it's all about complexity. We have to teach students to identify complexity in characters. A complex character has inner and outer conflicts that intertwine. They have flaws. They are not an ornament or a device for someone else's development. And that is what is so cool about teaching Eliza, because at first she appears to be a device for the title Hamilton to move through his arc and his development. He stomps on her a bit when he takes the position of Treasury Secretary, when he cheats on her, when he provides his son with the dueling guns that lead to their son's death. He reconciles and softens as time passes, and Eliza is his landing pad. She's constantly acted upon, and it isn't until Alexander's death that she's able to engage in actions herself. So many students associate the ability to act upon and to make choices with the traits that make somebody a lead character and therefore a complex and fully developed character. However, when we look at Eliza, we can smash this assumption and reveal that complex does not mean one who takes actions. Eliza is a complex character in spite of not moving action forward, because throughout her movement, from that enthusiastic, eager, excited young woman who falls in love and marries at the height of the American Revolution, to someone who's crying out for domesticity and taking a break and something simple, to a woman who is cheated on and loses both child and husband, this downward pit of suffering, which I think some of us recognize, those of us who are anywhere in the realm of middle age and wonder, how did I get here? We recognize it as being a legitimate arc, but our students may not recognize that. Eliza's happiness tanks. It absolutely tanks in Hamilton, and it's not at her hand. And this alone opens the discussion for the idea of the public and the private in our past and present, and there's a very valuable conversation there. But that one's not quite about character development. So when we think about the way that Eliza's happiness tanks in Hamilton, that her happiness is damaged throughout the musical, we want to talk with our students about how that is a form of character development, even though she is not the one making choices and taking action that leads to it. And so we further this conversation by digging into her conflicts. Remember that fully developed, complex character is one who has these internal and external conflicts, and that they are revealed throughout a piece, particularly in how they're going to interact with others along with themselves. And so Eliza, two of her key lines include "take a break" and "that would be enough." And these reveal her desire is to share a bit of her private realm, domesticity, with her husband. He, however, ignores all of that except for maybe the 4 minutes he was kicked out of the Revolution, until, of course, Quiet Uptown, and then he settles into Eliza's goal, or her ambition. But that happens out of total sadness. Eliza gets the outcome she was seeking, but at what cost? So when we talk with our students about Eliza and conflict, this is the sort of movement we're looking at, that replacement of her existing conflict of wanting domesticity with that whole new conflict that is unsolvable and internal. Early on, we have Eliza's desire for domesticity with her husband, which creates external conflict, and later we have Eliza achieving that, but at what cost? And it rings more internal to me, although the argument could be made otherwise. But just think of all the discussions you're able to have here that show the ways in which characters, and particularly female characters, are developed and why that matters and what it reveals. Simple, flat characters are not given that much complexity. Watching students realize that Eliza is as complex as Alexander is beautiful. So after we have our students rethinking what it means to be a fully developed character and that you don't need to be the hero taking action in order to be one, another thing that some of our students have been trained to think about when it comes to female character development is that female characters must be strong. This probably comes in the heels of some Disney movies and movies based on comic books and this sort of flipped script related to women in pop culture, where we once had princesses that were sort of quiet and soft-spoken and definitely not ones who created action. Think Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. We moved into having princesses that were loud and brash and who took action. Rapunzel is a great example. The same thing happened with action movies and movies based on comic books. Women become these forces, but they aren't any more complex. Maybe they were given a single conflict or one point of backstory, what's new, but what happened largely is they were given a sword or something and sent off to go be gorgeous warriors, but they aren't complex characters. If women are drawn as strong, but the role is still eye candy or flat sidekick, that's not really complex. And so Eliza allows us to talk about strength as well, and to have students realize this, that strength doesn't necessarily equal fully developed. Our students get to redefine that concept of strength through Eliza, and it's a wonderful juxtaposition because Eliza's call is helpless, and we have to engage with that. What does helpless carry throughout Hamilton, and what does helpless reveal about strength? Does it define it, contradict it, complicate it? What I hope comes out of that discussion is something about the multiple meanings of helpless. You know, one can literally be without help or feel so excited it's as if they can't be helped, but also a person can be helpless and a force at the same time. Helpless and strength are not opposed. Again, it's complexity, and these discussions about Eliza's development help our students start to be able to apply that when reading other texts or in the world around them. We do have to talk about burn when considering strength, but I want to come back to that in a minute. So throughout Hamilton, Eliza always speaks her mind. That is a strength that doesn't require a sword. And we can bring that back to take a break. There is no doubt what she wants when she requests take a break. She's also very steady, which is strength. Her motivations and desires and opinions are solid. She suffers, of course she suffers, and she persists through all of this. And as we know from the end, who lives, who dies, who tells your story, Eliza goes on to act and do great things. She's given the closing of the musical for plenty of stage reasons, I'm sure. Side note, I am not very well versed in stage traditions and themes and practices, but when we think about development of a character and of a text, if a person's closing it, it is for a reason. Go ahead and open that up to students to discuss the value and importance of Eliza at the end. I know that we can talk about how it's a gift to the real life Eliza because she's the only reason we know as much about Hamilton as we do, but it also works at a level of art, and having students explore that surge of Eliza at the end can lead to some valuable discussions as well. I think that Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story, as much as it pains me to leave it out of this discussion about her development, is because it's more about her developed. And that hurts a lot. But if you have an hour or so, I'll talk to you about Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story. Just not here. Next up, we can use Hamilton and Eliza's development as a way to introduce or explore the concept of writing something that reflects the time of the writer, but that is set in the past. Now is when we can come back to Burn. Burn exists to show us Eliza's reaction to the biggest betrayal of her life up to that moment. And it's appropriate for the time. Burning letters has always been a thing, but it's also a mirror of womanhood today. And that rallying cry, I hope that you burn. With this song, there is room for that line-by-line analysis with students to foster a discussion about what that song does to further her development, but also how it is a reflection of our time, that we have the time in which it was produced as an overlay on history. Eliza adheres to norms of her time as she occupies the domestic sphere and fulfills the roles and expectations of her during the time that her husband is alive. And there's something helpless about this as well, although it's never called that in the musical. I think it might be a little bit too on the nose. However, Eliza was created in contemporary times, and we see that. So this opens it up for students. What lies inside a female character from the Revolution that we can use to uncover a theme, or that we can use to reflect about society and our lives now? Answering this key question in an accessible text like Hamilton is a great warm-up for doing so in texts that have historical period, that, you know, they use a historical period to frame something about the time that the author is living in. Before I move on, I want to say that my answer to this question sits right on top of Eliza's look around. Embedded in look around is the very popular idea of mindfulness, of being in the moment, aware. Mindfulness is definitely of this decade, and Eliza's call to look around is useful in the musical for the role it plays in different scenes, but it also speaks to us as the viewer to stop and look around. And what is it that makes one lucky to be alive right now? And how is that attached to the time in which they live? When Eliza uses the phrase, she does so out of excitement. She is in awe of bubbling New York City, primed for revolution, or she is an expectant mother. And yet Alexander throws the phrase back at her in anger. Look around and watch me go be Treasury Secretary. I'm not throwing away my shot. And the absolute worst, when he calls back to it in Quiet Uptown, which is the pit of all pits of sadness in the musical. I once heard Lin-Manuel Miranda say that the line that would choke him up the most was the "near you" in Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story. But I heard that and I was like, no, come on. We all know that the most emotionally charged line is look around, Eliza in Quiet Uptown. The phrase of her optimistic youth, so full of hope and excitement, is now the anthem of her rather tragic arc. Look around works in all of the situations where it's used, but we can ask our students to consider the evolution of these words, how that shapes Eliza as a character from beginning to end, and of course, how it is a modern lens placed over these historical events. Which brings us to, once again, Eliza is complex and a fully developed character, and for our students, once they are able to identify what makes Eliza complex and fully developed, in spite of perhaps not appearing to be so initially, she doesn't have that hero's trajectory, she isn't really a driving force of the plot. This primes students to be prepared to analyze other female characters for those things, and then we have done our part. We have helped students become critical thinkers. They have flexed the tools of analysis that's going to help them solve problems in the world, and they'll be able to call BS on flat characters and reflect on the impact of that both within the text and in the world. So, really, how lucky we are to be alive right now. Hey, hey, I do, I do, I do, I do.